Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Observe and Report. This film came out in 2009 and it was directed by Jody Hill. This might seem like a really random review, and a lot of my reviews are random, but this is a film that I have always wanted to review, or at least consider reviewing, just because the first time I saw it, I didn't remember a lot of it, I have to admit, but it always stuck in my mind as something really unique. I felt it was very prickly. I wasn't sure exactly how I felt about it, and that was part of why I wanted to revisit it. And I knew, even as I was watching it, this is the kind of film that really deserves a rewatch. And for me, this film gets better every single time that I see it. Observe and Report, I think, is something special in a very squalid kind of way. I admire it so much because it's brave, it's very bold, and it's always kind of weaving between genres and never really quite settling into them in a comfortable way. So it always has just this slightly off-kilter quality. And of course, this is a Taxi Driver inspired piece and king of comedy as well. But just it's updated for a new generation where the irony, I think, feels even thicker than it did initially. And this film, Observe and Report, to me, it is very much a product of its time. It is so 2009. It's practically vibrating with that feeling. And what I mean by that is that it certainly could never be made today. A lot of movies in the mid-2000s certainly couldn't be made today. And quite honestly, I'm shocked that it was even made at the time in 2009, because it feels very much kind of like an indie film that is ringing with the Dadaist spirit, and it's the kind of thing that you might see just kind of like making the film festival circuit. And I guess that kind of makes sense because the filmmaker Jody Hill, he'd only really made one film before this one, and it was called The Foot Fist Way, and that was, quite low budget. And I think he had just kind of met the right people, got into the right doors, and eventually he was introduced to Seth Rogen, and that really helps, certainly, knowing somebody that was basically at the peak of their popularity at the time, in the mid-2000s. But initially, when this film came out, it was very poorly received, and I'm not at all surprised by that either. I think critics just didn't really know what to do with it. How do you categorize a film like this? One that has such a weird kind of muddled tone to it. And I think most importantly, it's the humor. The humor, I think, really reveals a lot about a person. It's the kind of humor that, it's going to trigger certain people. You're going to either really like it or you're not going to like it that much. I am personally of the personality, obviously, who really likes it. And I think, too, a big problem for this film was that it came out obviously at the same time as a certain other movie about a mall cop slash security guard. And of course, that was Paul Blart Mall Cop, which is, of course, a family-friendly film. It is the antithesis of Observe and Report, and obviously has a much wider appeal and the easier demographic, I suppose, to target. It's safe, and I think that Observe and Report obviously is the evil doppelganger version of it, and I think that's by design partially. But also, it's just that tightrope act that I think is really difficult to sell to an audience, constantly kind of teetering between the humor and the awkwardness and the tragedy through this very existential filter. And watching this film can seem maybe a little bit strange at first. Like I said, I think it really grows with repeated viewings, because I don't know, when I watch it, it does feel kind of like a hangout movie. It has that chill kind of stoner vibe to it to me, but it also has that real acidic bite to it, and I think it can jolt you, at the right moments. So it's rarely a situation where I'm just really engaged, I'm really on the edge of my seat, but I'm certainly not bored either. It's a weird kind of lull that I'm feeling, and it's like I said, a very interesting place to be. As I said at the beginning, it's about a security guard named Ronnie, that's played by Seth Rogen, and he works at this really ghetto-ass suburban mall, and it looks like it's maybe a year away, maybe a year and a half away from going bankrupt. And I love the fact that this takes place at a mall. I think it's the perfect setting for the consumerist illusions, I suppose. And it's just like any film that has some sort of mock society symbol. That's what the mall is. It is representing our society in maybe a smaller scale, in the same way that New York City represented all kinds of things like depression, post-Vietnam era for a Taxi Driver. And Ronnie is a really interesting character. I think that he really takes his job seriously. You get a sense of that very early on. He is a hard ass, and he truly sees himself as like an alpha protector. He sees himself as the person who's going to keep all of these mall citizens safe. Having this take place at a mall makes the irony even more bitter, I think, and obviously the comedy is more ripe with opportunity. Ronnie's morals are questionable and they are barely held intact, but he also has this major illusion of power. He is one of many delusional people in this mall, in this mini haven, I guess, that's just desperate to matter. And when you look at somebody like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, I think he perfectly embodies that for his generation, that, like ex-Vietnam vet who, is maybe in his late 20s, and he's deeply conflicted. And through the New York York City lights and the music and the porn and the cheeseburgers. It's like he's channeling all of that confusion, all of that frustration into this delusion of heroism. And Ronnie's very similar nihilistic drive, I think, is even more sad in so many ways because, again, it's that comedy that can really enhance the tragedy, it can really enhance the irony. Because weirdly, I do find this film more sad, or at least it affects me more in an emotional way, I think, than Taxi Driver. And not to knock Taxi Driver, that's one of my favorite films of all time. But again, I think there's something just about the comedy here that provides like a new way of looking at the tragedy. There's just so much bitterness to it. And as far as Seth Rogen goes, I think he is a revelation in this film. I think this is the best performance, hands down, he has ever given. And I say that maybe not as like a Seth Rogen aficionado. I haven't seen everything that he's done, and I know he's not somebody I particularly care for in just his brand of comedy. It just never was really for me, but I look at this, I'm like, it feels like this is what he was always meant to do. He's normally taking a lot of those talents, those gimmicks, and kind of shoving them to the forefront so he can be, kind of the likable character. But this feels much more honest to me. It feels like it's more organic. It's born out of that talent and not carved out of it just for like a specific film. But this does feel more honest. It feels like it's more organically built out of that talent, which I personally really like. And I don't know, I feel like he has taken all the things he's good at and shaped something that is very complex and even emotional without ever having to ask the audience for any of that sympathy, any of the laughs. Everything about him is just perfect for this role. It's just kind of the way he lumbers around, and he has his hair really short, and I think it kind of accentuates that permanent pout, that scowl that he always has on his face that makes him look straight up like he's like an adult baby or something, which is perfect because that's exactly what he acts like. He is an extremely unlikable character, and a lot of the characters in this are very unlikable, I think, on paper. And I think a lot of people do complain about him being unlikable. And I guess when I hear that argument, I never quite understand it. It's like, yeah, he is unlikable. He has few redeeming qualities, but there are many characters throughout time that are very similar to that people absolutely love. Travis Bickle is a good example. Tony Montana, Darth Vader, they're not the nicest people, are they? Again, it's not, to me, necessarily about how likable you are. It's about how the character is written, how that unlikability or whatever it is can be conveyed. And I think the problem with Ronnie, in part, is that maybe it's a little bit too honest. I think it might remind audiences a little bit too much of reality. It reminds them too much of themselves in certain ways. And I think naturally human beings are drawn to cynicism and nihilism. That's just the human way. He is hypocritical. He is passive aggressive. He's really, really pathetic in all of it. Delusional to major extremes. Deeply lost, deeply angry and racist. He's selfish. Very rarely does he do anything for anybody else. He says he does, but really most of the time he's doing it for personal gain. However, as I said, he does have redeeming qualities, and I think that's important. That can-do attitude is always getting him in trouble, and again, it's always at the expense of others, it seems like, but you do sense early on in the right situation, maybe these things could be channeled into good qualities. I think with a lot of the people in the film, it's like you can sense that they're good people. They're just a product of their era and their environment. There is a difference, though, in the character of Nell. I suppose you could look at her as the Jodie Foster character, as an Iris in Taxi Driver. But yeah, I mean, I like that she's different. She's obviously a young lady who works in the food court, and she serves Ronnie coffee every morning. She likes him. This is the first time, I think, that you really see Ronnie do something that is absolutely good. It is for somebody else. And Nell, just as a character, she's really the only one with a moral compass, and she's genuinely kind. Another thing I kind of appreciate about Ronnie is that he works hard. Certainly you may disagree with his methods of how he does it, and he can be a complete and utter fool the majority of the time. And obviously he's unpredictable too. He's barely held intact with the medications he's on, and maybe, I don't know, the occasional kickboxing class possibly. But he does go for his dreams. How many people can you say do that? In the film, in the opening of it, a mysterious man exposes himself to strangers in the mall, and this obviously leads the real police to arrive at the scene. So therefore, Ronnie is no longer the head. He's no longer important, or he no longer feels important. And it's that dose of reality that allows Ronnie to kind of, shift his point of view a little bit. He realizes that maybe he does want to leave the nest, and he decides that he wants to train to become a cop. Very few people would see an opportunity like that and take it, especially with that kind of confidence. And yeah, I do admire that to a degree. But the film absolutely never gets sentimental. It never lets you forget that this guy is a complete scumbag. He is a piece of shit, and He's one of the most delusional people out there, and he just sits in this really cynical world full of characters that are just morally repugnant. There is just a great emptiness, I think, that exists in the pit of this film's stomach, and again, I think all of this is very intentional. I love Ray Liotta in this. Obviously, he's playing the main cop, the real cop who is on the case, and he is obviously raining on Ronnie's parade because he is the guy who does the thing that he wants to do. He works the real streets, and casting somebody like Ray Liotta is very important because he's like a real movie star. He's charismatic and he's charming. He's all the things that Ronnie isn't. And yet Liotta reveals himself, I think, to be just as mean-spirited and ugly as any of the guys in the mall. I feel like every performer here is nailing it in some way. Like from Jesse Plemons, I forgot that he was in this film. He just has just wonderful understated humor. The scene with Aziz Ansari is just fantastic. And I have to say though, of all of them, it's Anna Faris. She is just wonderful. Faris, in my opinion, is fully Harley Quinn. I think she absolutely should have played the part. And she has a lot of those qualities here in the film. You know, she's playing a girl who is kind of trashy, and she certainly drinks too much, doesn't have a lot of self-respect, that's quite clear. And I think few people can bring out all kinds of tones in a performance like that. And this character could have so easily been stereotypical, but she makes it really complex because it's like, you know, she's very colorful in a lot of ways, but she can also kind of break your heart. She's funny, but she has a vulnerability just in her performance quality. She's ditzy, but she's also just really lovable, certainly. And I don't know, even with a character like this, you just want to wrap your arms around her. And truly, I feel Anna Faris, when she's at her best, she's always bringing more to the character than is on the page. That innocence, though, still always shines through, despite, you know, the train wreck that she is here. And I think in the hands of another actress, I don't think that the date between her and Ronnie would have worked nearly as well as it does, because I think it's a fantastic scene because it really balances, you know, the comedy and the tragedy. It's constantly teetering in that scene, and you're just not sure what side it could fall into. The sex scene in the film between Ronnie and the Anna Faris character, a lot of people do think that it goes too far. Or I should say, it definitely splits people. It gets a strong reaction out of people. And I've certainly thought about it. I think that maybe it offends people because they see it as meant to be like pure comedy. They see it as fully played for laughs. And I don't know, I guess I didn't at all. Like when I watched it, I found it to be really, really sad the whole time. Certainly the characters themselves, their interactions, the things they say can be funny, but the entire situation itself, I mean, I think it's heartbreaking. I find it dark and upsetting, but I also find it to be very realistic. I absolutely can see this date ending the way that it did. And like I said, the film just finds just a wonderful comfort, I think, in the areas that most people recoil from or pretend that, you know, they didn't hear it. And I don't know, the film does escalate and gets a little bit outlandish at times, and yet I still found a lot of that to be more revealing. Again, it doesn't have to look for the comedy or the tragedy or the strangeness because it fully embodies that, I think, quite authentically. There are so many different comedies out there that have this label of being, you know, badass or, you know, super controversial, and I feel like this film, again, it just exists in that world. It doesn't have to try to be anything. It just is. It just naturally has a bad attitude, and that's interesting to me. And I'm just so pleased that it exists, and I truly think it is absolutely so underrated, and I'm really trying to champion that cult status. But certainly if you have seen it, let me know whether you love it or hate it, and if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it. But that is the review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist and I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful as always. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.